Hi, everyone. Welcome to the main stage. I'm Steph Bell. The next talk we have is Modular Layer2's, which will be a discussion about L2's and modularity. And Cooper's going to come up. He'll be the moderator here. So give them a hand. He's going to do some introductions.
GM, everybody. We have a really exciting panel and a topic that I think is really relevant for the ecosystem today. We know there's a lot of L2s launching and also the discussion about modularity and how we can improve the fundamental architecture. The panel today we have from Mantle Network, our head of ecosystem, Arjun Kalsy, a software engineer from Mantle, AFK, and founder of Eigenlayer, Sriram. So let's start by just teeing up kind of where the ecosystem is at today. Arjun, what do you think are the key challenges that Layer 2s and scaling solutions today face?
So, all right, wow, that was loud. So if you look at what's happening right now, so the L2 model to an extent has kind of, let's say, product market fit. There's lots of L2s launching. There are many different types of chains. We've also going to be seeing ZK EVM chains, going into possibly some sort of baby alpha mainnet, depending on which team you ask, in the weeks to come. But I think what has to also happen is there has to be some sort of evolution on the basic chain architecture and design itself, which is kind of what we were trying to solve at Mantle. So we realized that you can build a chain, but if you build it with a modular architecture in mind, that's when the chain becomes a lot more scalable, it becomes upgradable, and at the same time you can continue to sort of swap out components and continue to sort of upgrade that particular piece of infrastructure with new capabilities. So for example, if you have a modular chain, you can do data availability, or you could have different types of fraud proofs, or other kinds of, let's say, features which you could add to the chain. But this is only possible if the testbed or the core architecture supports this kind of development. So this is kind of why we came up with the modular design. We've been working with Sriram and his team for quite some time. So we're very excited about this sort of shift in thinking towards modular architecture, because we have belief in this design choice of it being sort of the model for the future of Ethereum L2 chain design.
That's great, and of course you alluded to our partnership with Eigenlayer. I think this is a great place to ask Sriram, could you describe the role of data availability in Layer 2 scaling, and why is it important?
Yeah, very excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to the panel. So when you look at data availability, what is it trying to do, right? The idea is that whenever you want to run a Layer 2 solution, you're offloading computation and memory management to an off-chain system. So when you're offloading the computation to the off-chain system and submitting proofs that these systems are working correctly, we also need to have a place to publish the inputs to the computation. And if you publish the inputs to the computation, anybody can verify that the computation was indeed done correctly or continue on your system even if the sequencer goes down. So both for liveness and for safety, we need to have a place where we publish data, the inputs to the computation, in a very secure manner. And right now, most of the Layer 2 solutions are publishing data directly to Ethereum. And while this is possibly the safest solution, because you're publishing it natively on the Ethereum, call data, can be expensive. This is expensive because the underlying system is non-scalable as of today. And so when we think about data availability, the question is, where do we publish the data so that the inputs to the computation, so that anybody who wants to have access to it can actually access it? And when we want to think about the data availability problem, the way we think about it is, how do we provide scalable data availability? How do we publish data in a way that you can actually have a large decentralized network securing it, but at the same time, every node doesn't have to incur the cost of replicated network bandwidth and replicated storage. Everybody is not doing redundant work. That's not a way to scale. So that's a high-level overview of why data availability fits in with Layer 2s.
And with that understanding, I think we should better understand how Mantle and Eigenlayer are working together. Arjun, can you tell us how Mantle is addressing data availability with Layer 2 scaling?
100% right. So this is kind of where our collaboration with with EigenLayer comes to comes to its fore, because data availability is still in development. Many other teams are trying to sort of figure this out. In our research, we realized that Sriram's team has sort of had a very sort of, you could say, mature economic model with which how they wanted to solve this problem with E3 staking, and how this approach can solve data availability but also become a layer of decentralized trust, right, which has more capability, right? So we kind of felt that we should go with a design which has a long-term roadmap sort of built into the design itself, where you can do data availability, but then you can also do a ton of other things. And I think if AFK, you can maybe describe how the integration sort of looks, we could maybe give some more details.
Yeah, so we currently have a pull request that everyone should look at on the repo as well, that has a preliminary EigenDA network sort of spun up. So I'm not sure how familiar folks are with the architecture of EigenLayer at the moment, but there's sort of separate products. There's EigenDA, which can then which is a product used by rollups, which can then roll up their data and post to the main EigenLayer chain. So what we sort of have right now is a dual staking model where our data availability nodes are able to stake both BIT and ETH. We then take the call data that typically is posted to L1 in the OVMv2 CTC contract, and we sort of divvy it up, chunk it, and we cast it to these nodes to be stored on that network. I actually think that will be live in maybe 2-3 weeks from now, so I'd keep an eye out for that. Pretty exciting, yeah.
Right, and why this is interesting, from a model perspective, is that when you restake these assets, right? So let's say you restake ETH, or you sort of stake our token, let's say, right, for our particular, let's say, chain infrastructure. The yield on this staking is utility-based yield, right? You see this when you're staking crypto on a decentralized trust infrastructure, the yield is actually coming from actual utility which you're providing to the network, right? You're improving something. And this is the kind of yield which, this is how crypto assets should be used, right? To provide utility, to solve problems, versus how what we've seen is collateral-based yield, where you essentially stake your token, it becomes collateral in some protocol, you get your 10,000 APR. That's a zero-sum game, right? If you want yield, it should come from actual utility, and that's kind of what I really like about Eigen's model, where you use crypto to improve things, and that's how I think it should be used.
Maybe I can add a little bit of context on the economic model. So just to give a high-level overview, EigenLayer is a mechanism by which Ethereum stakers can provide other services. So this fits in very nicely with the Mantle worldview, which is that you're going to have these many modules, and it's not about committing to one particular module right now, but over time, as innovation comes in, you can continuously integrate these modules into the architecture. That's exactly our worldview as well, and all we are doing is to be like a decentralized trust marketplace to supply trust to these modules, be it I want to secure data availability, I want to run decentralized sequencing in the future, I want to run a super fast settlement, I want to write data, and if you want to write data to Ethereum, there is a certain cost and there's a certain latency. Can I get it done in 1 second and confirm to the users? So there are various levels of utility that decentralized trust can be leveraged in the modular ecosystem, and these are some of the dimensions we are engaging with Mantle on. On the core thing that we've already started working, and we're very excited that Mantle has chosen EigenLayer as a partner to build, integrate with EigenDA. The one very interesting thing about rollups is the one problem, and I'll say how we solve it, and the problem is that when you're running a rollup, you have very uncertain data availability costs. So the costs of data availability, which is the dominant cost of running a rollup, are very uncertain. So you don't know how much it is going to be because it's based on congestion pricing. So as suddenly right now in the bear market, prices are low and everybody's happy. And then suddenly what happens is when the network utility goes closer to the network capacity, then the prices start ramping up in a way that is highly unpredictable. Imagine you want to run an airline and you have no control on the jet fuel prices. You have no way to hedge it, you have no way to buy it. This is a very unstable way to run a chain because you cannot guarantee your users what the price dynamics are going to be on your system. So one thing we thought about a lot in building EigenDA is how do you make sure that when a rollup like Mantle wants to think about integrating with something like EigenDA, how do you give them an assurance that you have a certain amount of bandwidth that you can use, you can reserve it. So the idea of congestion pricing comes from a scarcity mindset. Like there's not enough, so there'll be congestion. And if there is congestion, we need to pay for it. And of course you have to. But when there is abundant block space, when there is abundant data availability bandwidth, you cannot price for congestion because there is no congestion. You have to price in the way that clouds think about, like, an AWS, for example, how do they think about pricing is you can reserve an instance and you can use it for yourself. And this gives a superpower to the rollup. A rollup like Mantle, when they start using EigenDA, what happens is they have price certainty so that they can tell their users that, till this transaction, this is how we're going to price. We know exactly how much it's going to cost us. And this is, I think, the way to scale crypto to the next billion users. We talk about this a lot, but we need to understand that the underlying rails need to have that scalability.
Yeah, of course. And one of the most interesting parts of working together is kind of figuring out how we can enter this new paradigm of pricing, giving users more certainty, and as a rollup, better understanding our own economics. So there's a lot of benefits here to working together. Sriram, do you want to go deeper into kind of the EigenLayer stack? AFK alluded to some of the components that need to work together. Nobody knows better than you how they work together and what the benefits are.
So when you think of something like the Mantle's modular stack, right? You have at the base, you need to write your settlement somewhere. So there is a settlement layer where you're writing the proofs that you've done your computation correctly. And these could be optimistic or ZK. That's one of the things we like about the Mantle architecture is keeping itself open to the evolution in the space. Because one thing we can all be sure is that the technology which is best today will not be the best tomorrow. So that's at the base, like how do you do like proofs? Then on the top, you have something like a data availability layer where you have to write the data. And again, in this layer, for example, way EigenLayer can be useful is by providing data availability to Ethereum restakers and having an architecture which is scalable. I mentioned the settlement, and settlement, one of the issues with Ethereum is the latency of finality. Ethereum takes 12 seconds to produce blocks and 12 minutes to create finalized blocks. And when you want to assure your users that your transaction's gone in with a much higher economic certainty, you use a layer like EigenLayer where you can actually prove that you've done it correctly to a restaked nodes who put their collateral up to certify that that was done correctly. So that's about settlement. And then you move one layer up, you have sequencing. So how are you ordering transactions? And one of the big things with ordering transactions is there is no way to prove that you ordered all the transactions correctly. And this is true for Ethereum, this is true for layer 2 rollups. So having a single node trying to order transactions is not necessarily the optimal way because when you run complex financial or gaming applications like Mantle is intending to do, the problem that you run into is how much MEV or like what is the censorship resistance that you can offer to the users. And having a more decentralized way of doing it, again, something like EigenLayer can play a role there. There's also other things like fast bridging and so on where we can have a good partnership.
And so we've spoken about a lot of these benefits. I'd like to hear from AFK if you could narratively tell people how they should think about the benefits of modularity in a way that they can remember and take home with.
Yeah. So honestly, about a year or so ago, a couple years ago, everyone was just trying to make these monolithic L1s that were all sort of competing with each other and vampiring attacking each other and everything like that. But I think that with the sort of new modular narrative, we can sort of come together and pull together like the best pieces of each sort of part of the infrastructure stack. So, like for example, Mantle, for our execution layer, we're just using OVM v2, right? We're combining that with, right now, EigenDA, looking into maybe working with other partners for fraud proofs, Specular, and that sort of like opens up our engineering team to trying to make as many improvements as possible to the developer user experience on our platform, and like making instead of having to focus on putting this whole working and developing on this entire vertical, if that makes sense. So I think that more and more chains are going to, or L2s are going to start leading in towards this. We see this with the OP collective. We see this with how like Coinbase now, instead of going like, we're going to build our own L1, we're going to build our own L2, we're just going to leverage the existing technology and work together with them, co-develop, start giving back. And I think that this sort of hyper-collaborative future is really what will accelerate the adoption and the acceleration of innovation within technology itself. Yeah.
No, definitely. I mean, the future is innovation through collaboration versus, confrontation. And I think if everybody in the ecosystem collaborates more and works together, then we'll get to the promised land faster, right? We'll get to mass adoption much, much faster. So we are committed to this model, and we feel that everyone else should also follow this model and collaborate together and sort of achieve these results.
Absolutely. I feel like something that people should take home with them is that one of the benefits of modularity and unbundling the traditional monolithic stack is it creates a lot more opportunity for synergies across the ecosystem, which benefits everybody. Because competition does at times create waste, but when we can partner together and work together, it really ensures that we take the step forward as an ecosystem. AFK or Arjun, do you want to speak more to Mantle's specific architecture and how it improves upon existing Layer 2 solutions?
So I can talk about some of the stuff that we've been working on top of the existing like OVM 2.0 stack. We currently have been experimenting with decentralizing the sequencer, which I think is something that's a bit exciting. We're using a bit of a naive model at the moment. You can actually take a look in our docs, but it's sort of like a round-robin model, like BFT, weight-based staking, with like a scheduler. So each of our like block builder nodes sort of take turns either being the scheduler who will choose the next node based off either some election protocol or like weight-based staking, and the node that actually constructs a block that is a sequencer. The rest of the nodes sort of become followers, if that makes sense. Now this model right now is a bit naive, and there's like edge cases that may not be handled, but we're like determined to like continue iterating over it in order to see like what we can do to improve it further, and we're really open to working with other teams who have also been working on decentralized sequencer models to see how we can sort of like collaborate and like pull it back into the stack and make it available for everyone to be able to use. Some other stuff we've been experimenting with is we've been sort of like co-developing fraud proofs with Specular, a small company out of I think Don Song's lab in Berkeley. Again, like I think that we could have gone our own route and been like, we're going to make our own fraud proofs, and that's gone really well for every team that has tried to do so, I believe. So I think that working with a team that has the expertise, lending engineering help, and helping them like develop like a proof of concept, helping them sort of like iterate and test through it together is, again, what's going to get us the farthest. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also just take a quick minute to talk about how we've used multi-party computation, right? So this is like a very unique way of solving the optimistic roll-up problem, right, of 7-day exit periods, right? So typically all optimistic roll-ups have a 7-day exit period, and there's a reason for that, right? So it's a fraud proof, it's optimistic in nature. So when you post, for example, the data and the proof on L1, there's a 7-day window for anyone to prove a fraud, right? So if you think about it, what you actually need to do is get people to prove the fraud faster. Because if you could do that, maybe you don't have to wait 7 days. And this is kind of where the multi-party computation system comes into play. So we've used the same MPC style which many wallets use. Specifically, for example, if you look at Zengo, uses multi-party computation with a threshold signature scheme. We've used the same model, created a separate set of nodes called multi-party computation nodes. And there's also another set of nodes called verifier nodes. And this is like super interesting. So whenever the sequencer creates a proof, the multi-party computation node network, which is a separate node network and also decentralized, creates the same proof, right? And then the verifier nodes sort of check both those proofs. So if the sequencer and the MPC nodes, the proofs match, then the proof is considered to be correct, right? And depending on the decentralization of the MPC node network and the verifier nodes, you can almost prove fraud immediately, right? So your 7-day exit period could become 3 days, could become 1 day, or possibly even a few minutes, depending on how you set up this network. So we've kind of done many interesting things. I encourage you guys to look at our GitHub repo, see our code, everything is open source. But we've tried to take existing optimistic rollup designs, right, and continuously sort of iterate and improve on them. And we'll continue to do that and bring like new technology and new techniques to the fore. So yeah.
And of course, some parts of this design are very intended to pass off gas savings and cost savings to users. Sriram, could you talk a bit about how this architecture contributes to that?
Yeah, like I was saying, one of the most important things is having price certainty. Not just price certainty at a low price point and a high throughput is what we are looking for. Seems like you're asking for too much, but that's not really the case because there are improvements in the distributed systems architecture and actually work done by EF, which is really pushing the frontier in this. The core idea of how to get hyperscale data availability. Dark sharding is a kind of a major milestone in this in this evolution. And what we've done is, like Mantle was saying, building on existing great ideas. We took the dark sharding architecture and basically made it usable with the eigenlayer core decentralized trust model in a way that actually it scales even better than what was originally anticipated. So instead of right now on Ethereum, we're having 83 kilobytes per second throughput, on EigenDA, we have a 10 megabytes per second throughput, and we have a roadmap to scale this even further. So once data becomes abundant, and it's not just a way of making data abundant by asking all the nodes to do a lot of work, it is by asking the lot of nodes to do a small amount of work. That's how we basically get the cost savings, and this is passed on back to the Mantle rollup and to the users.
So we have one final question here, which contributes to the broader picture of Mantle and EigenLayer together. Within the BitDAO ecosystem, there's many parties. Arjun, could you briefly tell us how this ecosystem contributes to the overall vision of what we want to do within Web3?
100% right. So BitDAO was set up with the sole objective of building Web3 technology for mass adoption. Right, so if you look at all the different pillars of mass adoption, when you look at mass adoption like a problem and you start working backwards, you need to solve, obviously, infrastructure, you need to solve research, you need to solve education, right? And you also maybe need to look at sort of other structures which bring in a huge number of users, right? So if you look at what BitDAO is doing right now, BitDAO is sort of incubating Mantle, right, which is next generation L2 infrastructure built for super high scalability. BitDAO is also invested in Game 7 because gaming has the potential to bring in a huge number of users. There's also ZKDAO, which does research in the ZK space. There's EduDAO, which is solving Web3 education. So all the different pillars you need for Web3 mass adoption is what BitDAO is committed to building, right? And it operates like a DAO, so it's completely decentralized, right? Which is interesting for us because chains, typically, all the chains in the world are super centralized and become decentralized or a DAO at some point in the future. We're already there. That's our starting point. And this is where we will continue to build. And because we're a DAO, we're committed to building in collaboration. Right? This is how DAOs also scale. DAOs don't scale vertically like a tech stack, right? They scale horizontally with the size of the community. So the more partners we work with, I think the better the outcome will be for the Web3 space as a whole. So that's BitDAO's mission, and that automatically becomes Mantle's mission, which kind of gives you a sense of the kind of design choices we made and our philosophy towards building technology. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that, and that concludes this panel. I'd like to invite you to a warm round of applause for our panelists. Thank you all.